Continuing with our loose theme of keeping an eye on things, our next speaker is from the University of Indiana, where he serves, among other things, as the Chief Security Officer of the OS Pool. And I imagine his talk is going to be about how boring his life has been in the last 6 months. He's been watching his grass grow, and there's been no interesting things changing whatsoever.
I won't. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I won't comment on the University of Indiana thing, but anyways, yeah, things have been boring. And if I knew I was going to be keeping an eye on things, I would have brought my moody eye to put up here or something like that, prosthetic eye. So anyways, I'm Mark Krenz. I'm the lead of the OSG Consortium, I guess is how I'm supposed to put it, security team. And I know we're all probably tired by the end of the week of hearing about AI maybe, so I thought I'd make it a little bit more fun by replacing it with Badger. And this Badger was made in Badger, so it's like Badger to the Badger. So when you hear me say Badger, just think I'm talking about Badger. Okay, so this is our security team. We're all people from Indiana University. We're not Badgers. These are real photos and everything. We work for two different groups at IU. One is the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research. That's where I'm from. And then Adrian, Mega, and Vishal. Mega and Vishal are here. They work for a group called OmniSoc, which merged in with REN ISAC, which is a security group that's also hosted at IU. So thinking of our responsibilities that we normally go through, I'm going to just kind of cover these briefly. But there's a lot of things that we could do in security. And so we're focused on, right now, mostly scanning the OSG infrastructure for vulnerabilities of known announced vulnerabilities that come out. We monitor about 180 hosts. It varies from time to time, and whenever we see that go up or down, we follow up with infrastructure staff to see why those numbers might have changed. We use a Nessus server that's actually hosted at IU to do the scanning. And then we follow up and we try to remediate any vulnerabilities that we find. The other thing that we do, and this is for both OSG and the community, is there's a large number of vulnerabilities that come out every day, right? And there's like tens of thousands a year now as far as CVEs go. And that would take a lot of time for infrastructure staff to, on a regular basis, go through and try to figure out, does this affect me or not? So we do this job of curating through those and finding out which ones actually matter to OSG infrastructure. And then we do deep dive analyses to see whether, it's something that is crucial to alert on, to upgrade, and in the worst of cases, have to reboot the system and affect downtime. So we try to reduce that effort on all the staff's part by doing this centrally to OSG. But you can see that the numbers have increased greatly. Already it's June, it's only halfway through the year, and we're more than the number of vulnerabilities that we did deep dives on last year. And we've sent far more communications at this point than we did last year. The other thing we do is we coordinate with the community to answer questions about security. As risks come up that we need to alert the community on, we talk about that. We have those kind of discussions, help people out with transitions between certificates, CAs, and so on. And then also thinking about the risks to OSG itself, trying to communicate those risks to leadership and prioritize fixes for that. So, we do a lot of this curation of vulnerabilities that come out. And so when we're sending out some kind of announcement about vulnerabilities, it's going to be pretty important, right? It's gone through several stages of analysis to make sure that it's relevant to the OSG. So it's important to read through the entire announcement that we do, not just the beginning and stuff, because we've analyzed it a lot. But you can see that we run the gamut of different types of vulnerabilities, from privilege escalation to, remote command execution. There's been quite a few privilege escalation vulnerabilities in the Linux kernel recently that we've had to announce on. And just month to month in 2026, you see this huge uptick in May. And June is actually not up to date. There's actually one or two more that should be there, but we're probably on track to maybe meeting what was in May or not, or at least exceeding what we had in April. And why it's not forwarding the slide. It is over here, but not here.
Oh,
Oh, a hidden
but
slide.
is it up?
Okay,
Not confuse ourselves.
okay, that's weird. Um, maybe a bug, maybe a security issue. Okay, so when you see things misbehave like that, that's like a hint that there's some kind of potential vulnerability there. Um, the other thing that we do is we coordinate with the LHC Tier 2 sites and Tier 3 sites and LHC in general to help them to exercise their security programs and so on. And one of the things that we've been doing is running a series of lightweight tabletop security exercises. The first of which is to kind of validate that their secure communication channels are intact and all the contacts that they expect to be there are there. Um, and let's see. And I'm not here to shame anybody or anything, because security exercises are a great way to discover that you have issues that you need to deal with before you actually have a real incident. And almost every time you have a security exercise of some kind, there's some kind of takeaway. Even if you think you've gotten everything down, there's usually something that comes up with every simple exercise. And so this was just meant to kind of exercise those channels so that in the second half of 2026, we can actually go through and do something more relevant to OSG infrastructure and LHC infrastructure based on authentication systems that are in use and so on. And that's the Atlas detector and the CMS detector, and it's a banana colored scaffolding for scale because it's really large. I guess it can fit in this room, is what somebody said, which is crazy. Okay. And then thinking into the future, we'll continue our existing activities and making announcements. And I'm trying to strategize ways to efficiently deal with the increase in vulnerabilities that we've been seeing, because not only is it going to be taxing on our own team, but on OSG's staff as well. So trying to find ways to make that so it's more efficient. And then we want to run more security exercises, not just with LHC, but also have some within the OSG infrastructure. Look for more announcements from me on that later. It's not just going to come like an alert on your phone for a tornado or something like that. And then one thing I'd like to do, if you're not familiar with something called the trusted, well, first of all, trusted CI is the other half of my effort for my job. It's basically the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. We help science projects with their cybersecurity programs. And one of the things that we've published is the Trusted CI framework, which beyond just a normal control set for security controls, it looks holistically at a cybersecurity program and how it interacts with leadership, the focus on the mission for the organization, going back to these slides, that's the mission, right? The mission is to do the science, not to do cybersecurity for cybersecurity's sake. So the framework is all about those types of things. Cybersecurity control sets are one aspect of it, but there's a lot more to think about in making a successful cybersecurity program. So I want to try to evaluate OSG against that framework. And I think for the most part, we're doing pretty well. One thing I'm always happy about is when I'm on the executive team calls, we talk about security quite a bit. We'll spend like 30 minutes talking about SSH keys on the executive team call, and that's always kind of a shock to me, a welcome shock. But a lot of times security kind of gets left in the dust and is an afterthought, but it's definitely a central part of the way OSG works. Thinking about the Badger era that we're going into and the current state of, the Badger moved. Okay, you can't rely on badgers to stay in one place, I guess. So the current state of Badger is that it's capable of more advanced and automated attacks as well as discovering new vulnerabilities. Some, I think, that humans would find it hard to discover. Some of the recent vulnerabilities, when I've looked at the attack path and stuff, I'm like, whoa, that's pretty complicated. I think that there'd be issues with a human actually trying to discover some of these. So we're seeing new capabilities potentially. And then down the road, we've heard the fear mongering about super AI, or it's covering up myth. Super badger. Sorry, super badger. See, the badger moved, and now I'm saying AI, or mythos, which just came out this week with guardrails on it. Right? It's like this was supposed to be something that we were supposed to wait for in the future and worry about. But the report is by Anthropic that it's capable of finding 0 days in the kernel within minutes or something, and we could be looking at a flood of vulnerabilities into the community, maybe more than we can handle. If we have multiple vulnerabilities coming out each day, that's going to lead to a lot of downtime due to reboots and mitigation steps that we need to take. So this all takes up a lot of time. If you think about the remediation timeline, number 4 and 5 are affecting the availability of OSG, where, if something is a OS update that actually needs to restart systems or maybe block access to systems, then that's downtime for science. And we want to try to stop that. So kern vuln patching usually requires a reboot, which means downtime. So to talk about this further, I want to give some historical context related to the way Linux kernel modules have been a recent focus and their vulnerabilities there. So in the old days, when you actually ran Linux, you had to compile the kernel. And this is a screenshot of the make config. And just getting a show of hands, how many people have compiled a kernel in the last year? In the last year. Okay, good job. Okay, note that I didn't raise my hand and I'm a Linux user, right? And so this isn't something that we really do anymore, but the reason why we would do this is so that we could actually make the kernel slim and only focused on what we actually had on the hardware. But that was a support issue for Linux, is that people would get a distribution and then they'd have to go through this compilation step and everything. And it was, they would ask questions like, why isn't, my X Windows working and stuff like that? Why isn't my network card working? So they got the bright idea to start more modern distributions, compiled all the kernels. I don't really have a slide showing the transition to modern distributions, but they started compiling all the modules in the kernel. And so now you have like 2,000 to 6,000 kernel modules that are just sitting on the disk waiting to be loaded, but only about 100 or so actually get used on a regular basis. So that red part, which is all the modules, is a attack surface for the kernel. And when you get something loaded into kernel space, it can do anything on the system, bypassing all the other controls. So we got to find a way to actually address this as a problem. And so I saw people talking in a forum about changing your strategy to now using a default deny policy. People call it a blacklist too, but in security, we've switched to using like deny list and allow list. So using a deny policy where we basically profile the modules that we use, like maybe by using lsmod, running a program that I'll talk about in a second, and then blocking all the rest. Because once you get a system configured the way it needs to run, you don't really need to do anything else, with it. You usually don't add new modules or something like that unless you're drastically changing the way the hardware works, especially with servers. Servers don't, you're not plugging in a tablet or something like that to a server or a webcam or whatever. So there's usually not much change that happens. So the deny list would actually stop modules in their tracks from being loaded when an exploit comes out. And so the standard way that this is handled is through modprobe.d. That's the kernel's way of handling the loading or not loading of modules. And this is done through text config files. And then, we've seen this recently with the copy fail and the dirty frag vulnerabilities where the mitigation was to put in like bin false or something like that for those modules that were affected by the vulnerabilities. But then there's a program that's come out recently called Module Jail, and it's just a shell script that basically looks at the modules that you're running and then lists out all the other modules on your system and denies all the ones that you're not running. You still need to go through and kind of curate things and make sure that it's not going to block something that is that 5 minutes total or 5 minutes till questions? Okay, thank you. So you still need to curate it to make sure you're not going to block something that like is needed on boot or something. So you can use this mod probe DB also to profile your system to make sure that you're keeping track of temporary modules and stuff like that. But in general, I think that we need to start thinking about this strategy in order to reduce the amount of downtime that we might eventually have due to increased AI discovery of vulnerabilities. And then thinking about the bigger picture beyond OSG and just how science works. I come from, private industry originally before I was in academics, and it's always been impressive to me how open we are, like in academics and science research, and how everything's open source and put up on GitHub and stuff like that and shared. But this also can be a point of risk, right? These are screenshots of some of the different major facilities, GitHub repos, and I actually got this information just by asking Gemini, right? It just spat out the different GitHub repos. I mean, I could have found them myself, but it made it a whole lot easier to discover this stuff. And so with Super Badger, right, Super AI, being able to discover vulnerabilities in any code that you give it, now the attackers can easily find science infrastructure code and possibly find vulnerabilities in it. So this is kind of a once in a generation risk, I would call. Those of you who have been around for long enough remember when Y2K happened, the public kind of got the wrong message out of that. They said, what was the big deal? But you remember that there was like years of preparation to make sure that these 2-digit dates didn't actually cause massive problems for us. And so we're kind of in a similar situation where we have this window of time where we can actually address some of the vulnerabilities that are in the software that maybe hasn't been seen yet or focused yet. But with Super AI on the horizon, and I cross that out because just this week, Anthropic released Claude 5 with the guardrails on it. But that shows how close we are to this time where we're running a big risk of vulnerability. So I think there might be an opportunity here for like an emergency response center or something that the government or NSF could maybe fund to try to look at all the different software and centralize that process of trying to protect against the threats here. So that's my spiel for that. And with that, do you have any questions? Yes.
Hi, Mark. I think it was one of the earlier slides might have been 12 or 13. You don't need to go back to it, but you got done mentioning, hey, we have the super AI coming around, or we already have pretty good AIs to begin with. And then the next slide, it was like you had this diagram that says, the timeline for pain starts when a CVE or exploit becomes public. I'd say happens now, even before that, as soon as a kernel commit becomes public. Even
Right.
an innocent looking one,
Right.
everyone's just throwing their AIs at these commits and being like, hey, is this actually a security, issue?
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think that, I'm a big open source advocate, but I think that the strategy for open source probably needs to change in light of these recent issues that we've been seeing. Because, yeah, people can look at GitHub repos and probably evaluate the diffs that are happening to see what's going on and find some kind of vulnerability before it actually gets discovered by a science researcher. And the other thing is, don't assume that just because it's not open source that it's not vulnerable, because the Windows source code has been leaked, and there's also dark markets for source code leaks and everything like that. So, just because vulnerability Just because the white hat cybersecurity vulnerability researchers haven't found it, doesn't mean it hasn't been found. Any other questions? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure we'll all sleep better at night now.